For our scripture reading, we heard that reading from the book of Numbers. It was sort of hard to follow. It was about vows and oaths, binding yourself. Now this passage is from the time when the Hebrews were poised to enter the promised land. Remember, they had been wandering in the wilderness 40 years. And finally, they were going to enter the promised land. And the passage we heard is a part of a much longer passage where Moses is giving them advice and rules to live by once they get there. Remember that Moses himself will not enter the promised land. He will see it, but he will not enter it. And so he's telling them how they need to live once they get there. Now the passage we heard deals with vows and oaths. And a vow is a statement that binds someone. You obligate yourself with a vow. We normally think of vows as wedding vows. In the marriage vows or the wedding vows, you obligate yourself to your spouse. But vows are not confined to marriage vows. There are all kinds of vows you can take. Now, an oath is defined as a solemn promise. You promise to do something. You agree formally to do something. We normally think of oaths as if you go and are a witness in a courtroom and they make you swear that you'll tell the truth. Yes, you're taking an oath. Now, oaths and vows are basically the same. You are binding yourself to something. You are agreeing to do something or agreeing something. And in the passage we heard, it said that if you make a vow or an oath and bind yourself, you must abide by it. That was actually the first part of it. You are to keep your word. And that's what Moses told them first of all. You keep your word. If you agree to do something, if you vow to do something, then you do it. You keep your word. If you make an agreement, you keep that agreement. Now, after that, it goes on to some interesting things about women. If a wife or a daughter makes a vow or an agreement, and the husband hears it and does not object, it stands. If he hears it, though, and he says, wait a minute, this is null and void, then it's null and void. So the husband or father can object to a vow or an agreement made by a woman if he hears it and he does not object. Then it is the same as him agreeing with him. In other words, he doesn't get to say, well, wait a minute, I didn't agree to that. Now, the thing is, if he doesn't object, then it stands. Now, there is a phrase in there that says, a binding oath to afflict her soul. An alternate translation is that a binding oath to humiliate her soul. And afflict or humiliate the soul, we don't really know what that means. It's just sort of a mystery little passage there and there that we don't know what that means. It may seem strange to have this stuff in there about oaths and vows when the Hebrews are going to enter the promised land. Time is short. Moses only has a little bit of time to tell them these things. And it's interesting that vows and oaths apparently were on the most important list because he didn't have time to tell them much. Now keep that in mind. And I'll look at something from the New Testament book of James. And this goes like this. We all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a mature man, able to bridle the whole body. We put bits in horses' mouths so that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look at ships. Although they are large and driven by fierce winds, are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member of the body and boasts great things. See how great a forest fire a little light kindles. The tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of existence. It is set on fire by Gehenna. For every kind of beast and bird, reptile and creature of the sea is tamed by mankind, but no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Now you can see that verse talks about the things we say. The things we say are a spark that can set a whole forest on fire. The things we say contain a world of unrighteousness that defile the whole body. The things we say are described as an unruly evil full of deadly poison. Now you can see those images are very graphic. It's talking about the things we say, and it talks about them as being very dangerous. There was a phrase in that passage called the course of existence. That's what's sometimes called the wheel of life. It's the path you travel through life. You can look at it. You're born up here, and you travel around this wheel until you get up here, and you die. The tongue sets on fire the path you travel through life. You see, the words we say can do some very bad things. And we can connect this passage to the passage we looked at from Numbers. Because oaths and vows are words we say. Now I want to leave the Christian Bible and go to a Jewish writing known as the Talmud. The Talmud is not Jewish scripture. It's rabbinical teachings from after the time of Jesus. But it is not, although it's not scripture, it is thought very highly of in Judaism. And there's one book of the Talmud called the Nedarim. The Nedarim is about what is called Neder, N-E-D-E-R. And a Neder is a verbal declaration that allows an individual to prohibit an object for themselves. Now, to figure out what that means, I'll use an example. Take a loaf of bread sitting here. And if we issue a neder on that, and we say this loaf of bread, to me, is as a sacrifice in the temple. And by saying that, it is as a sacrifice in the temple, and I am no longer able to eat that because to me, it has been transformed. It's not transformed to you. It's still a loaf of bread. But if I say to me, that loaf of bread is as a consecrated sacrifice in the temple, then I'm not able to eat it because it has been transformed into that to me. And that is important in Jewish tradition because according to Jewish tradition, not only can God prohibit things, so can people prohibit them for themselves. In the Bible, God prohibits the Jews from eating pork. An individual can do the same thing for themselves by making a neder. And so individuals have great power. It is the power exercised by individuals which is the power to reshape reality. The neder, which are spoken in words, reaffirms the object in question for the person who says it and recreates it into something different. And in Judaism, it is seen that words actually do transform this object. This loaf of bread, if I issue a neder on this loaf of bread and say this loaf of bread is as a sacrifice in the temple, then to me it actually does become that. It's not that I just think of it that way. It actually becomes that. And that's because in Judaism, words are seen as having the power to reshape reality. They transform and they can even misshape the world we live in. In Judaism, they put lots of emphasis on the words because they see the words having the power to transform reality. Now I want to think for a minute how we normally understand language. We normally understand language as matching words to the object we're talking about. For example, we match the word tree to a tree. We match the word cat to a cat. And that's how we normally look at language. We're just matching a word to the object we're talking about. And in this understanding of language, words don't really do anything. They just point to the object we're talking about. But there is another way of thinking about language. Language can be thought of as the words not merely describing an object, but they transform an object. In the example we talked about with the loaf of bread, to me, the words of my neighbor transform that loaf of bread into a consecrated sacrifice. It's not that I just thought of it that way. They transformed it into it. Every society must have something to bind itself together. Every society must have bonds that bind it together. And in Judaism, it was thought that the words, the common meaning of words, is what bound their society together. The words operated as glue that bound people together. The common meanings of words. But when someone would issue a datum, the common meaning of words was lost. And each word could mean a different thing to you than it did to someone else. And the result of that in Judaism was fear, because it was feared that people would build their own private worlds. You see, one common language and common words are what bind a society together. One common language, common words, gives a common meaning for life. The words we use can alter and impact our reality. Some people have said that words is at the heart of human history. Human language is more than communication. If you've ever been outside and there be a squirrel up a tree, and here comes a cat walking through the yard, you might hear that squirrel start making sort of a quacking sound. And it's doing that to communicate that there's a potential predator in the area. Animals communicate facts. This squirrel is communicating that there's a cat in the area. But human language is different. Human language can transform reality. Take the United States, for example. Think about the physical reality of the United States. If you start on the East Coast, you've got the beach. Then you've got the sand hills. Then you've got the foothill, the Piedmont. Then you got the foothills. Then you got the mountains. Then you got the Mississippi River. Then you have the plains. Then you have the desert. And then you have the Pacific Ocean again. That's the physical reality of the United States. And in between there, you've got all kinds of trees and vegetation growing. In between there, you've got all kinds of animals growing, and fish and birds, bears, coyotes, wolves, whatever. And so you see, with words, though, we take the basic physical landscape of the United States and make it into the United States of America. You see, without words, the United States of America would not exist. It is words that express the ideals of the founders of this country. It is words that express the Declaration of Independence. It is words that express the Constitution It is words that express the laws of this country. We take the basic reality of the landmass, and by using words, we create the United States of America. And that could not happen without language. The words we speak, in that case, transforms just the landscape here into something different, into the United States of America. And now we can go back to Moses and see why he placed so much emphasis on vows and oaths. You see, Moses was telling the people, you're going to cross over there into the promised land and you're going to build a society. And words are going to be how you build it. Words are going to be how you build that society. And in the Talmud, the book called the Nadarim recognizes that words can not only build up a society, but words can also tear it down. Words can build a society, or words can tear it apart. Words transform reality. A good example of that, just look at something that happens in the news. Take something that happens in the United States. Then go to a conservative news source and read the article about it. Then go to a liberal news source and read the article about it. And you'll have two different versions of what happened. Two completely different things. How can that be? Only one thing actually happened, but the words used to report it changed the reality of it. There was one time years ago, something happened around here. And Walt and I knew what happened. We knew really what happened. When the story came out in the Shelby Star, it was so different from what happened, it was unreal. Okay, what really happened? We knew what really happened, but for the perspective of everybody in Shelby and Clinton County that read it about it in the paper, they knew one thing. You see, the words transformed the reality of what happened into something completely different. You see, very few people actually witness things that happen. Most people depend on being told what happened, and being told what happened becomes reality to them. And how it is reported in words becomes reality. So we can take any one thing that happens and by using words, make it into this or make it into that. We can't change what happened, but we can change people's perception of it. And that's really what reality is anyway. Now, a good example that I was going to use, I'll still use it, although it's changed a little bit now because it's this balloon stuff. You know, all these balloons that they get willy-nilly shooting out a balloon every time you turn around. Well, they've changed the story on that a little bit, but I did this before they changed the story, so I'm going to use the balloon thing. A good example is the balloon thing. Now, Republicans framed that as an example of Joe Biden's weakness and indecisiveness, while Democrats framed it as an example of Biden's strength and resolve. And so you got one thing that happened, and you got two different reports of it. One makes him look weak, one makes him look strong. It's the same thing, but you see, by just the words we use to describe it, we can make it into one reality or make it into another reality. And it doesn't really matter what the true reality is. It only matters the reality you convey to the public. You see, there is a Jewish holiday called Yom Kippur. It is one of the most solemn of the Jewish holidays. It is the day when religious Jews try to atone for their sins and achieve reconciliation with God. On the eve of Yom Kippur, a prayer called the Kol Nidra is used, and it goes like this. All vows, prohibitions, oaths, consecrations, restrictions, interdiction, or any other equivalent expression of mine which I may have vowed, sworn, dedicated, or which I may have prescribed for myself or for others, from this Yom Kippur until the next, we regret them all. All shall be absolved, remitted, canceled, declared null and void, not in force or effect. Let our vows not be considered vows. Let our prohibitions not be considered prohibition. And let our oaths not be considered oaths. You see, they're releasing themselves from all their promises on that day. All of them. And this seems sort of shady. Seems sort of dishonest. All the things I promised last year, now you can forget about them because I'm nullifying them all. Why do they do that? Think for a minute when we looked at the Nazarene. We saw that it's really not as much about vows and promises as it is about the power of words to transform reality. You see, because according to the Nazarene, our words construct our worlds. If we use ugly words that deplete, damage, destroy, drive apart, then that's the kind of world we create. And so on Yom Kippur, when the Jews are releasing themselves from their vow, they're not doing it in any kind of shady or dishonest way. What they're really trying to do is release themselves from the ugly worlds their words over the past year have created. You see how they take that so seriously, that words can transform and create reality. That once a year they go back and they try to release themselves from these ugly worlds their words have created. Think back to the year 2020 when we had all those riots. It was words that started all that. It was words that inflamed all that. You see, inflammatory speech caused it, and it got picked up. It was like that forest fire that just swept through everywhere. It was like the book of James says. One little spark with all the agitators fanning it up made all those flames. And that's the kind of things the Jews try to release themselves from on Yom Kippur. From our gospel reading, we heard Jesus say, I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. Now that phrase, idle words, means words which are of no benefit, things which are unprofitable, things which cause harm or damage. Jesus says we will give an account of those for every word that we said like that. Jesus goes on to say, by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. That's something to stop and think about. By your words you will be justified or condemned. One of the problems we have today is too much inflammatory speech. Words are tearing our society apart. We've talked today about the danger of the words we say. See how the Bible warns us to watch the words we say, lest the words we say create an ugly word. Remember that words can create a society and bind it together, but words can also tear it apart. And according to Jesus, ominously, those who participate in that will be held accountable. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. Let us resolve to be more careful about the words we say.